Good evening, everyone. My name is Rachel Lane, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you to our first Curator Talk of the 2025-2026 virtual programming series. Since TR and all of his sons were veterans, we felt it was especially fitting to plan a talk around Veterans Day to honor their service, as well as the service of anyone who might be attending. To get the evening started, I'd love for you to drop in the comments where you're tuning in from. We love to see what places are represented. And since this program is specifically highlighting the military service of the Roosevelt family, if you're a veteran and you'd like to share, please feel free to also mention your branch of service. So just one moment as I drop that question in the chat. All right. Dropped in. So yes, if you want to share where you're joining us from, and if you're a veteran, what branch of service, that would be wonderful. So as we wait for some responses to trickle in, I'm pleased to introduce my colleague, Sue Sarna, our Senior Curator of Collections. Sue is the former curator of Sagamore Hill National Historic Site, which is, of course, Theodore Roosevelt's home in Oyster Bay, New York, where she spent almost her entire career in the National Park Service. She managed over 250,000 objects related to TR and his family and managed two separate multi-million-dollar renovations of the 26-room home. Sue also oversaw the vision for the interpretation of 7 temporary exhibits and the redesign of permanent exhibits at Old Orchard Museum, which is the house where Theodore Roosevelt's son Ted and his wife lived. Sue joined the library staff in April 2023, and we are so fortunate to have her expertise as a museum professional and her deep knowledge of Theodore Roosevelt. I personally have learned so much from Sue about TR, and I am delighted that you too will have the chance to learn from her tonight as she discusses the military service of Theodore Roosevelt's family. As a note, we want our virtual programming to be educational but also interactive, so please feel free to drop any questions in the chat and we'll cover them at the end of the talk. For those of you who subscribe to our monthly virtual programming newsletter, Sue will also answer one of the questions from the poll. If you don't already receive our monthly virtual programming newsletter and would like to, we're dropping a link in the comments below where you can sign up. So just a few places people are joining from: San Diego, Dickinson, woohoo, North Dakota, represent, Oyster Bay, Highland Beach, Florida, and Indiana. So a great representation. So I'll drop the link for the virtual events newsletter in the comments. And, oh, Utah, yay, very well represented. So, well, I think we're good to get started, and I will go ahead and turn it over to Sue. So just one moment. We have Sue and then also her slides. If I can figure out how to do this. Okay, yes, we're good.
Well, hello, everyone. To continue with Rachel's comments, I'm so delighted to be here. So welcome to the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library Curator Talk. I'm really excited that Rachel asked me to do this. This is something I'm really passionate about, and this is perfect for tomorrow, like Rachel said. So let's dive right in. So the title of this presentation, Pride and Anxiety, the Roosevelt Family During the Great War. This statement is derived from a letter written by TR to his son Archie following Archie's injury at the front during World War I. This session will examine the Roosevelt family's involvement in World War I with particular focus on Theodore Roosevelt's perspectives regarding the conflict and the contributions of his youngest son Quentin, who of course lost his life in action during the war. So let's start with the family background. Theodore and Edith raised 6 children, 4 boys and 2 girls between Washington, D.C., Albany, and Sagamore Hill. They raised them according to the values of the strenuous life. They were taught to work hard, study hard, and participate in rigorous physical activities. TR and Edith wished to raise their children to be good citizens who would make positive contributions to their country. As children of the president, the American public got to know each of the children quite well and followed their stories in the press closely. TR and the American public expected great things from the Roosevelt children, and for TR's sons to follow in TR's footsteps. TR entered politics as an assemblyman for New York State, but catapulted to fame following his service in the Spanish-American War in 1898. His highly publicized actions in Cuba made him a household name and launched him on a higher political career path. Shortly after he returned to Long Island, the press and New Yorkers called for him to be nominated for governor of New York State. He won the election, paving the way for his nomination for vice president under President McKinley and succession to the presidency after McKinley's assassination. TR's actions in the Spanish-American War had brought honor to the Roosevelt name, family, and country. He hoped that his sons would have the same opportunity to serve their country as he did. TR had a complicated relationship with the military. His father, Theodore Roosevelt Sr., had not actively fought in the Civil War. Instead, he had done what most upper-class, wealthy New York men had done, and he hired a substitute, which unfortunately did pass away during the war. And of course, he had reasons for this. His biggest one was his wife, Mittie, was from Roswell, Georgia, and had several family members fighting on the side of the Confederacy. And she feared greatly that her husband and her family would meet on a battlefield and kill one another. Although TR never mentioned embarrassment about his father not serving his country in the Civil War, some historians have speculated at the effect that that experience had on TR and his views on service to his country. Though TR's favorite president was Lincoln, growing up, TR was very interested in the war stories from his Confederate uncles and cousins. TR did not have regular formal training, military training at all. He did not attend a military academy. He did not formally train as an officer. His military experience initially consisted of hearing war stories from his Confederate family members, reading about war, and of course, writing about war. He wrote his first book on the Naval War of 1812 as a Harvard student. Later, he would go on to hold the position of Assistant Secretary of the Navy. TR resigned this position to help form the U.S. First Volunteers to fight the Spanish-American War in 1898, where he received his only military training. TR looked back upon this time with fondness and pride. TR romanticized war, especially this war. In fact, his favorite title to be called later in life was Colonel, and he chose it for the rest of his life over being called president. Prior to the famous charge up San Juan Hill, TR wrote to his friend Henry Cabot Lodge saying, "Should the worst come to the worst, I am quite content to go now and to leave my children at least an honorable name." Friends and family accused TR of exhibiting reckless behavior in rushing in and getting involved in the Spanish-American War, and then reckless behavior on the way he acted during the war itself. He had fully prepared to die in Cuba. Honor to your family and country was paramount to Roosevelt. Yet TR was critical of the regular army and the regular army training. He wrote Archie in 1917, "In 98, I was better than any colonel save on the regulars before Santiago. In the army, it is only the exceptional men who can conquer the unfavorable conditions. Few army regulars go on improving after they become majors. As soon as a man ceases to improve, he goes backwards." Similar to TR's view in 1898 that the U.S. should declare war against Spain quickly, TR was adamant that the United States should join World War I earlier. He criticized sitting President Wilson for not entering into the war sooner, telling his son Kermit, "Wilson is at heat an abject coward, or else he has a heart so cold and selfish that he is entirely willing to sacrifice the honor and interest of the country to his own political advancement. We ought to have universal military service." This is a letter he wrote on August 26, 1915. TR was surprised and gravely disappointed that the German sinking of the Lusitania didn't push the United States to join the war immediately. When TR learned of the sinking in May of 1915, he said to the press, "It seems inconceivable that we can refrain from taking action in this manner, for we owe it not only to humanity, but to our own national self-respect. TR would, of course, have to wait nearly 2 years after that statement for the U.S. to join the Great War. Theodore Roosevelt was a proponent of preparedness, universal military training, and universal military service. TR military leaders like Colonel Leonard Wood did not think the U.S. was sufficiently prepared for war. They advocated formal military training, programs for college-educated and college-bound young men, as well as young businessmen, in the form of course, the ROTC and a summer military camps. A military camp was formed in Plattsburgh, New York in 1915 to train volunteer citizens to become soldiers. Several military camps popped up all across the United States to prepare the male population in case of U.S. entry into the war. TR's son, Ted Jr., who's 28 years old at the time, Archie, 21, and Quentin, 17, would attend the Plattsburgh camps over the summers of 1915 and 1916. Kermit, 26 years old at the time, was working in South America in 1915 and 1916, and he would attend Plattsburgh camp in the spring of 1917. The boys learned about modern warfare and gained valuable leadership experience that could potentially give them higher ranks when they did enroll in the military and join the fight overseas. TR visited the camp in August of 1915. After his visit, he wrote to Kermit, calling the camp a glimmer of hope. The people who attended represented, to quote Theodore Roosevelt, the best of our race and our class. Almost immediately after the U.S. declared war in April of 1917, TR traveled to Washington, D.C. to petition President Wilson to allow him to raise a band of volunteers similar to the Rough Riders that he formed in 1898. But unfortunately, warfare and technology had changed greatly in the 19 years, it's a long time, since the Spanish-American War. Wilson and his military leaders did not think that TR was A, fit enough, or well-versed enough in the new war methods and strategies to be successful, and they declined his offer to raise a volunteer cavalry. Oh, sorry, I should have changed that. Theodore was deeply upset that he would not be going overseas to fight. He wrote to his friend John Burroughs, "I shall never cease bitterly regretting that I was not allowed to go to the other side. I would not have expected to come home alive." If TR was not going to be able to fight, he could at least try to use his influence to secure good commissions for his sons. He wrote to General Pershing to ask that Ted Jr. and Archie be able to enlist under his command as privates, though he mentioned that they attained the ranks of major and captain respectively in the Officers' Reserve Corps. Pershing agreed, and Ted Jr. and Archie received their orders to travel overseas to Europe to join the American Expeditionary Forces, not as private, but as a major for Ted and a first lieutenant. Kermit had missed out much of the military training of the preparedness movement when he was in South America, but he wished to get to the front as soon as possible. He wanted to either fight for the British or the Canadians because he thought it would bring him to the front faster. So, back to TR writing letters. He wrote to Great Britain to see if Kermit could secure a commission with the British forces. He wrote to his friend Cecil Spring Rice, "It is, of course, asking a favor, but the favor is that the boys shall have the chance to serve, and if necessary, be killed in serving." TR and Edith's youngest son, Quentin, took leave from his studies at Harvard to enlist. And of course, TR, again, using his influence, got Quentin into the flight training for the U.S. Air Force in Mineola, New York, on Long Island. Archie wrote to his brother Quentin's fiancée, Flora, in 1917, "You are drifting into a family that is doing the right thing as well as it knows how. And you will never have to make any excuses for any of your future in-laws not sacrificing themselves for the cause." Prior to departing for the front, Quentin Roosevelt had told the president of Allegheny College, Reverend William Crawford, "It is rather for us to practice what Father preaches." These two images of the newspaper articles highlight the interest of the American public in the activities of the Roosevelt boys at the front. Americans had watched the Roosevelts grow up in the White House years. Now, the article on the right is interesting in that it juxtaposes the military service of the Kaiser Wilhelm's 6 sons with that of the Roosevelt boys. The Kaisers were given positions, of course, of high rank. From the front, they were not put on the front, and they were stayed far out of danger, whereas the Roosevelt boys were fighting in the trenches on the front lines. This letter gives you an idea of what was going on back home. This is a letter from Archie's wife, Grace, to Kermit's wife, Belle, and it's after the Plattsburgh. And you see on the bottom, just have to get rid of it, it says, have you heard that Ted has been put in the lines over the regulars? George Roosevelt knows the 26th, and the captains are all splendid, some more than Ted. So there was a lot of talk about the fact that the Roosevelts were given these higher commands. And of course, they were given that in respect to Theodore Roosevelt. And what's interesting also about this letter, this is a brand new letter that has never been published. This is the first time actually I'm using the letter in something. In the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library just got a collection of papers from family members. And this is actually one of the family members' letters that the first time I'm using it. So it's kind of exciting because we're seeing something that has never been published before. And it gives us really an insight into the family and what's going on at the time. Before getting into the activities of each of the Roosevelt children during the war, I want to highlight the home front. Oyster Bay. What is TR and Edith doing? TR and Edith sent 4 sons and 1 son-in-law overseas for the Great War. Back at home, Edith wore a 5-star pin, as did her daughter Ethel. At Sagamore Hill, the family flew a 4-star flag, as seen in this photograph of TR and Edith with their daughter Ethel and her children, and Archie's wife, Grace, and her child. During the war, Edith and Theodore cared for grandchildren and supported their daughter-in-laws while their husbands were away. Their daughter Ethel and their daughter-in-law Eleanor both left their children in the care of TR and Edith when they went overseas with their husbands. Describing her feelings about her sons overseas, Edith wrote to a friend, "It is like becoming blind or deaf, but one just lives on, only in a different way." In July of 1917, TR wrote to Quentin, "It is dreadful to have you all go, and it would have been far worse not to have you go. My veins thrill with pride when I think of you." A month later, TR further explained his feelings to Quentin about his sons being at the front. He wrote, "My disappointment at not going myself was, down at bottom, chiefly reluctance to see you 4, in whom my heart was wrapped, exposed to danger while I stayed at home in do-nothing ease and safety. But the feeling has been completely swallowed in my immense pride in all of you." This was always at the top of TR's thoughts, his pride in his sons and how they were serving his country. TR's eldest daughter, Alice, did her part to contribute to the war effort. She encouraged people to buy war bonds, staffed canteens, and worked with the Red Cross. Her husband, Nicholas Longworth, did not serve overseas due to his reelection as a congressman, but was responsible for figuring out how to finance the war. Ethel and her husband, Dr. Richard Derby, were the first Roosevelts to go overseas in 1914 to support the war effort, almost 3 years before the U.S. formally entered the war. Richard Derby worked as a surgeon at the American Hospital in Paris, while Ethel worked as a nurse for about 3 months. When the pair returned to the States, Ethel became very involved with the American Red Cross. She also participated in library drives to send books overseas to soldiers. After the United States joined the war, Richard Derby would return to the front in France as a surgeon with the 2nd Division. Theodore Roosevelt Jr., Ted Jr., he wasn't really interested in a career in the military, but his father discouraged him going into politics. He said he felt that he needed to go into the Army. And Army training was beneficial to a career, but Ted actually had wanted to go into politics. Ted Jr. was assigned to the 1st Division, 26th Infantry in France. He suffered at least 2 major injuries during the war. At the Battle of Cantigny, he was gassed by the Germans. The citation from his commanding general read, "On the day of our attack, although gassed in the lungs and gassed in the eyes to blindness, Major Roosevelt refused to be removed and retained the command of his battalion under a heavy bombardment throughout the engagement." His wife, on July 24th, 1917, Eleanor Butler Roosevelt, sailed for Europe to work for the YMCA in France. TR had not wanted her to go. He had seen the toll that going overseas had taken on his daughter Ethel's health back in 1914. He did not want the women in the family to follow in their husbands overseas at all. He did eventually change his mind, and Eleanor Butler managed to get overseas before the U.S. imposed a restriction on travel overseas for relatives of soldiers. Travel across the ocean was tricky with the German submarine warfare. Luckily, she made it alive, and U.S. lawmakers feared that if wives, sisters, or daughters were to go overseas, they would distract the soldiers. Eleanor had spent time in France as a child. Upon her arrival in Paris, she settled into her aunt's home and began work for the YMCA, which included managing the canteen, teaching French to soldiers, and basically being a support system. Eleanor's home in Paris became a home base for the Roosevelt brothers abroad. She offered them food, care, comfort, and most importantly, company during very difficult times. Richard Derby actually wrote in his book, "I shall never forget several days with my sister-in-law. She always took splendid care of anyone who turned up at her house." Kermit. Before he entered the war, Kermit wrote to TR, "I don't like the war at all because of Belle and Kim." He had just had his first son, Kim. "But as long as it's going on, I want to be the first to fight in it." Kermit first served as a captain with the British Royal Engineers in Mesopotamia, who was fighting the Ottoman Empire. He received the British War Cross for his actions. And by May of 1918, Kermit was transferred to the American Expeditionary Forces as a captain of the 7th Field Artillery of the 1st Division. Archie was first assigned to the 1st Division, 16th Infantry in France, but was later transferred to the 26th Infantry, the same regiment as Ted Jr. was in. TR did not support having both brothers fighting in the same regiment. Like all the Roosevelt boys, though, Archie was remembered for his willingness to be first at the front. Fellow soldier Paul Michaels referred to Archie as an absolutely selfless gladiator who insisted on being the first to smell the enemy's bad breath, regardless of the risk. Looking back, historians have pointed to a sense of, as the terminology I used before, recklessness. There was recklessness in each of the Roosevelt boys during the war. Archie confessed to Quentin's fiancée Flora in a letter of 1918. "With so many of our family over here, I confess that I never take up the paper without a tremor." In March 1918, Archie was seriously wounded in battle. He had taken shrapnel in his kneecap and broken his left arm. After it was confirmed that Archie would live, the family rejoiced at his gallantry at Sagamore Hill. TR wrote to Archie, "Of course, tonight we are divided between pride and anxiety, beloved fellow. Early this morning, the newspaper men told us you had been given the Croix de Guerre. Well, we know what it feels like to have a hero in the family. You don't know how proud we are of you. Mother ordered some Madeira. All 4 of us filled the glasses and drank them off to you. Then Mother, her eyes shining, her cheeks flushed, as pretty as a picture and as spirited as any heroine of romance, dashed her glass on the floor, shivering it into pieces, saying, 'That glass shall never be drunk out of again.' And the rest of us followed suit and broke our glasses too." After spending time at the hospital in Paris, Archie was ordered back stateside to recover. He was discharged from the army with a full disability and received both Silver Stars and the French de Guerre. Archie is actually one of the only soldiers to actually be discharged from the Army in World War I and fight again in World War II and be discharged again. Very interesting. The youngest son of TR and Edith, Quentin, began flight training in April 1917 with the U.S. Air Forces at the Hempstead Plains Aerodrome, which was named Hazelhurst Field. It had previously been a National Guard base. Since the base was so close to Sagamore Hill, Quentin mostly was a commuter student. He would sometimes even fly over the home of his sweetheart, Flora Payne Whitney, in Old Westbury. The two had become engaged that spring, but the engagement was kept quiet because initially each family disapproved of the match. Quentin trained at Mineola for 3 months in a class of 50 college-educated young men. A Canadian lieutenant colonel who went to Hazelhurst for an inspection described it as backwards and lacking organization. He estimated that the training facility was functioning about 4 years behind the Canadians. The flight school at Mineola lacked the proper number of military training pilots, and many of their old planes were in old and in poor condition. Quentin first learned to fly in a Curtiss Jenny JN-4 biplane. Later in France, however, he flew the Newport planes. Regarding the Newports, Quentin wrote to his father, "These little fast machines are delightful. You feel so at home in them, for there is just room in the cockpit for you and your controls, and not an inch more. And then they're so quick to act. You could do 2 loops in a Newport in the same time it takes a Curtiss to do 1. In early July, Quentin achieved the rank of first lieutenant in the aviation section of the Army's Signal Officers Reserve Corps. Shortly after he received orders to go to the new flight school in Issoudun, France. He spent about 10 months in total at Issoudun, working as a supply officer and a transportation officer while still training to fly. At one point, Quentin received orders to go to the front, but a misunderstanding kept him at Issoudun. Quentin feared being called an embusque, someone who shirks his duties, and received negative letters from his brothers, Ted and Archie, who were already serving at the front. Quentin wrote to his father in December of 1917, "I'm not overly pleased with my status at present. I know both Ted and Arch feel that I am the embusque member of the family, and the trouble is, they're right. The only thing is that I am certainly not responsible for it. I am going ahead with my advanced flying down here as fast as I can, and trying by every means possible to get in France or British squadron. What Arch and Ted don't see is that I really have done everything in my power to get out. I don't stay behind the lines by choice, and I am not hunting for a non-flying occupation." TR, sensing the mental stress that Quentin was under and his pressure the brothers were putting on him, wrote in February 1918, "I am exceedingly indignant at Ted and Arch. I am more proud of you and satisfied with you than I can say." On June 8th, 1918, Quentin would get his chance to move out to the front, joining the 95th Aero Squadron. TR was overjoyed with the news and cabled to Quentin, "A couple of days ago, we were thrilled by your cable. I know well how hard the long delay has been. My joy for you and pride in you drown my anxiety. You are at the front, and I am satisfied." The family had further reason to celebrate on July 10th, 1918, when Quentin downed a German plane. The New York Times published a celebratory article about Quentin's kill, and the family celebrated at Sagamore Hill. TR wrote to Kermit, "The last of the lion's brood has been bloodied." He also wrote to Ethel, "Whatever now befalls Quentin, he has now had his crowded hour and his day of honor and triumph." The family's joy would quickly turn to despair. Just 4 days later, Quentin was shot down by the Germans behind enemy lines while on a raid on July 14th, 1918, Bastille Day. Since his plane fell behind enemy lines, there was initially no confirmation of what happened to Quentin. At first, Quentin's friends thought he might be missing or captured. After searching the wreckage of an American plane, the Germans realized that the pilot was Quentin Roosevelt, the son of President Theodore Roosevelt. Having respect for the former president and for Quentin's bravery, they gave him a military burial with honors. Unfortunately, then, the Germans took a photo of Quentin, bloodied next to his plane, as propaganda. The photograph was printed as a postcard and was distributed amongst both sides in the war. Multiple copies of the postcards were actually sent to Sagamore Hill and actually are in the archives today. Several days after Quentin's death, American forces regained the territory and discovered Quentin's grave. They took parts of Quentin's plane and formed it into a shape of a cross. The grave would take on several different appearances over the years, growing more permanent and formal in time. It should be noted that Quentin's grave was actually moved to the American cemetery in Normandy after World War II, so he could be buried alongside his brother, Ted Jr. So how did the family first hear about this? They first received news that something had gone wrong with a family member overseas on July 16th. A telegram had been sent to the New York Sun from a reporter who was at the front. The telegram advised to, in quotes, watch Sagamore Hill 4. But unfortunately, the rest of the cable was cut off. That's all that TR received. But TR realized this had something to do with one of the boys either being injured or dead. The next day, another telegram arrived with a local reporter who carried the unofficial news of Quentin being shot down over enemy lines. Though they did not know exactly what Quentin's fate was, TR made a public statement to the reporters regarding Quentin. He said, Quentin's mother and I are very glad that he got to the front and had a chance to render some service to his country and show the stuff that was in him before his fate befell him. After the news was confirmed, condolence mail flooded into Sagamore Hill. Theodore and Edith decided to seek solace at Ethel and Richard Derby's home in Dark Harbor, which was in Maine. The mail was all forwarded there, including the letters that Quentin had written to his parents before he had died. They arrived in Maine after, of course, his death. Though the family had prepared for death during the war, Quentin's death deeply shook the family, dispersed between the United States and Europe. Ted Jr. wrote to Ethel, Quentin's death is always going to be the greatest thing in any of our lives. Alice said, all of our lives before and after have just been bookends for the heroic tragic volume of the Great War. After Quentin's death, the artist John McCutcheon drew this cartoon for TR. It's TR changing the fourth star from blue to gold. Reflecting on the death of Quentin, TR wrote to a friend and fellow Rough Rider, Bob Ferguson, it is bitter that the young should die, but there are things worse than death. For nothing under heaven would I have had my sons act otherwise than as they had acted. They have done pretty well, haven't they? Quentin killed, dying as a war hawk should, over enemy lines. Archie crippled and given the French War Cross for gallantry. Ted gassed once and cited for conspicuous gallantry. Kermit with the British Military Cross now under Pershing. The nation mourned Quentin's death as well. The boy who they had followed through the press from his antics in the White House and his White House gang to his victory overseas was now dead. A newspaper article from 1918 asserted that Quentin's death changed Quentin from the Theodore Roosevelt son to the nation's son. Long Islanders mourned the loss of Quentin too. On September 24th, 1918, the Army dedicated the eastern portion of Hazelhurst Field to Roosevelt Field, which it actually is still named today. After Quentin's death, TR tried to continue on with his life as usual. He traveled the U.S. on a speaking tour to encourage people to buy war bonds. He continued his writing for the Kansas City Star. The problem was, as Edith and his valet both stated in multiple letters, the life had gone out. The boy had died in him. His spark in his eye had gone, and they just felt he was never the same person after. When the war ended in November, TR had to be checked into Roosevelt Hospital to be treated for rheumatism, as well as several other lingering ailments from his trip to Brazil. He was released from the hospital just in time to celebrate Christmas at Sagamore Hill. On the morning of January 6, 1919, Theodore Roosevelt died of a pulmonary embolism at the age of 60. Archie cabled, "The old lion is dead," to his brothers Ted Jr. and Kermit, who were still overseas at the time. Most historians say that perhaps TR also died of a broken heart due to Quentin's death. Losing his youngest son, the son that was most like him and perhaps had the brightest future of the four, in a war that TR had pushed for and had placed enormous stress for the boys to join the war. The anxiety and the pride might have been just a bit too much for Theodore Roosevelt. Throughout the Great War, Theodore Roosevelt was divided between his pride for his children serving their country and his anxiety that they would be harmed or worse, killed. TR's anxieties came to fruition with the death of his youngest son, Quentin. His wife observed, "Quentin's death shook him greatly. I can see how constantly he thinks of him and not the merry, happy, silly recollections which have sad thoughts of what Quentin would have accounted for in the future." The war that TR had adamantly fought to join took away his precious son, who was destined for a bright future. And eventually, some feel took him away too. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the Roosevelts and the Great War.
Thank you so much, Sue, for that. So I wanted to jump in and note that we had some other people jump in talking about where they're joining us from. So we have Colorado Springs, Colorado, Quebec, Canada, Montana, both Bozeman and Webo, Louisville, Kentucky, Maine, and Michigan. And I want to especially highlight that we have at least 3 veterans who are joining us, 2 from the Air Force and 1 from the Navy. So we very much appreciate your time, Sue. I know that I learned a lot about the Roosevelts just hearing you speak. And I think it was especially exciting to see the letter, which is being shown to the public for the first time. So I wanted to give anyone a chance to drop questions in the chat. And while I'm giving you time to do that, I just want to note that we appreciate you joining us this evening, and we want to give, of course, a special thanks and recognition to all of you in the audience who answered the call to serve, just like Theodore Roosevelt and his sons, and we very much appreciate your service. If you would like to see more curator talks like this one, let us know by dropping a comment or sending us an email with maybe the types of things that you'd like to learn more about. As I said before, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the comments for Sue to answer. I know Sue and I kind of riffed earlier today on World War I, the Spanish-American War, and as Sue noted, TR's response was very similar to both of them. He wanted to get involved in both of them, but it was really what happened after the 2 wars, whereas it was a very happy occasion. He's catapulted into fame for the Spanish-American War, but with World War I, it's much more somber.
Yeah, it's very, the outcomes of the wars were completely different, even though in both cases, the United States actually comes out triumphantly. Unfortunately, in Theodore Roosevelt's case, he did not come out triumphantly in World War I. And I think one of the biggest things also was his not being involved in it. The sitting home and writing letters and just trying to raise money for the war bonds, that really hurt him too. He needed to be involved. He put his sons at risk, and yet he felt he didn't put himself at risk, and that was something that he just couldn't take very well.
So we have a question from the audience, which is very related, and that is, did Edith ever express regret that her husband pushed their sons so hard to join the war?
I don't think so, Steve, because in all the letters and a lot of the quotes that I read, you hear Edith really proclaiming the pride that her sons are in the war also. She also, remember, let Ethel go. If she wasn't the one who didn't want Ethel or Eleanor to go, that was TR. So I think Edith was actually very proud of what her sons were doing. And I think she supported TR fully. Maybe not as fully as maybe TR did, but I think she was very supportive of the sons joining the war.
So Sue, I'm wondering if you know anything about this. So I hate to put you on the spot, but I know like I've read that the volunteer regiment that TR wanted to have for World War I was going to be both like integrated, like Black and white Americans. Do you know much about that?
I don't know much about the integration, but it was a cavalry unit.
Okay.
But as I stressed, it was a 19-year difference. And now, interestingly enough, in the Spanish-American War, of course, the Black regiments and white regiments fought separately. They fought on the same battlefield, but they fought separately. Whereas this would have been an integrated troop.
All right, so I'm not seeing any other questions. So I'll give people just half a second more if you want to drop in. But thank you, Sue, so much for sharing your knowledge with us. We very much appreciate it. And we appreciate all of you joining us and spending a little bit of your evening with us as we honored veterans in the Roosevelt family. Have a wonderful evening, and we will see you all at another Curator Talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Bye, everybody.